The bright-eyed little girl ran along the shore. Her mother died in childbirth, and her father was responsible for her upbringing. The tall, lean man was hard on the girl. They lived in the old den. The wooden hut somehow held the heat from each crack that blew cold sea air. The man worked as a guard on the lighthouse. His task was to turn on the lantern for lost ships. She saved people's lives from the seamouth. The girl grew up on her own. Mary did not keep her company telling her stories. She was like a wild reed craving companionship. Her father restricted her from civilization. There was nothing in the house but a wooden table, a couple of chairs, and a bed. Once a week, Mike, her father's name, went shopping. Their diet consisted of black bread, macaroni, and some croup. They were supplied with fish by the sea. These days, the baby was left on the island all alone. "Oh, that's beautiful." She opened the electric board, said the little rascal. Dad was gone. He was late. Mary thought Dad was lost at sea and maybe he needed help. "For Dad to find me, I need to turn on the lantern on the lighthouse. He will see and will come home." Thin baby hands reached into thick electrical wires. She was saving her dad. Before she could get the cable, there was a bang, and many tiny sparks shone across her face. "Ow, it hurts so much." Trying to cover her face with her hands, she fell on the cold, damp ground. A couple of hours later, her father moored to the shore. He didn't see the blonde girl running. He suspected something was wrong. The father's heart was popping out of his chest. Out of breath, the father's heart was popping out of his chest. Out of breath, he ran to the house, but no one was there. After looking through all the daughter's favorite places, he did not find her. There was only one place, the lighthouse. The lighthouse door was open. "Dad, where are you?" Mary's voice was barely heard. "Mary, my daughter, what happened?" the lighthouse keeper shouted. The little girl was lying there with no sign of life. Massive tears were coming out of her eyes. Her father raised his daughter with shaking hands. His daughter had an accident. Mike dragged her outside. "Dad, why is it so dark?" Father looked at his only daughter with horror. The light was shining in the yard. His lips trembled. "So now is the night." The desperate father answered, choking in his tears. She went blind. All life was divided, before and after. Now she had to learn to live in a new way. It had to be a clean slate. He wondered how to explain to poor Mary that she would never see sunlight. How did the seasons change? The 7-year-old girl continued to lie in the man's hands. The father fell to his knees. Pressing his daughter, he wept with all his might. "God, why are you punishing me like this?" He turned to the sky. "You took my wife, and now you want to deprive my daughter of me?" Poor Mike. With the last strength in his fist, he carried his daughter into the house. "Honey, now we have to learn to live in a new way." Tears continued to flow from Mary's eyes. Then she understood the situation. Her childhood world was immersed in eternal darkness. Lying there for a couple of days, she tried to get up. Her white feet stood on a cold wooden floor. She fell a couple of steps. Fear, mistrust, and confusion stopped her. It was a cold, harsh winter. The girl was growing up. Her father tried to breathe life into Mary, but she felt nothing. Her eyes were always cold. She tried to see something, closed her eye, and she squinted all the time, but the result was not there. Having reached the age of 18, the father decided to put his daughter in a specialized boarding school. There were children with various defects, as their parents called them. Mary cried and did not want to let go of her father. After all, she had no mother. She was afraid of losing the one person she knew. The teachers at school were strict. The children were very violent. These children never saw the faces of their natural parents. Their parents had long since abandoned them. They had written them out of their lives. They had not loved Mary since the first day. She was too bright. She was always fighting for justice, defending her point of view. She was trying to survive in a violent environment. Her only consolation was her friend Emma. The girls quickly hit it off. Emma saw but could not hear. She was her eyes. The girls spent all their time together. Emma talked about everything around them, and Mary painted in her imagination the bright world in which she lived. It did not last long. Emma was soon adopted. Mary felt abandoned and forgotten. Mike visited his daughter very rarely. He tried to find a good job and ran to the doctors hoping that at least someone could help him regain his daughter's sight. Everyone had their hands up and refused him. She spent 10 years in this horrible place. Mike took her home after graduating. The Lighthouse has been recognized as a local attraction for all these years of absence. Crowds of tourists began to visit the island. But even this did not save the financial situation of the family. It is worth noting that she acquired a unique ability with the loss of vision. She sang very beautifully. She sang songs every time she walked in the open air. She remembered and knew every hillock. Twisting her memories from childhood, she was afraid to forget the brightest moments. As she walked, she hummed her new song. Her eyes were full of tears. She constantly cried as she sang. On that day, another group of visitors arrived on the island. The guide Lively kept the historical story about the old lighthouse. Tourists listened to him very carefully. Among them were two guys. These were young sailors who had just returned from a long voyage. JC, the blonde-haired guy, was different from his friend. JC's friend was too frivolous. At that moment, she was sitting on the hill. The wind was playing in her long, thick hair. Her gaze was drawn further away, trying to see something. JC fell in love with Mary at first sight. He didn't know the girl was blind. He snuck up and tried to capture her on his camera. Hearing the camera click, the girl hurried away. She was avoiding people. But the persistent young man found the right words to win the young lady over to him. Looking into her eyes, he saw the emptiness and despair. Mary looked at his face with her hands. Her long fingers glided over his face. She tried not to miss the features of his face. As she spent her evenings talking, she fell in love with a boy. No one cared or cared more about her than would live without him. His health deteriorated. He had terminal cancer. A terrible cough with blood kept torturing him. Frequent fainting spells prevented his daughter from having a happy life. He left his little girl in the hands of a violent world. Learning that Mary could regain her sight with expensive surgery, JC went to his beloved father. Her father listened to him and said he could not collect such money, and there was no one to lend. He did not have such an amount. JC wanted Mary to start seeing him. JC's crime was the only way to get Mary's sight back. He committed the robbery and secretly sent all the money to the clinic where the surgery was due. That evening was the last time Mary heard the voice of her loved one. JC was forced to resort to deception. He told her that he needed to go on a long sail. The girl's heart trembled. Everyone she loved so much refused her, but she knew he wouldn't be happy with a blind woman. After the act, the boy surrendered to the local police and was given 5 years in prison as punishment. Mary underwent an operation, after which she regained her sight. Meanwhile, the girl learned that she was pregnant. She would have a son. Her father soon died. Now she was alone in this vast world. She gave birth to a son and did not stop waiting for her lover. All day she walked, looking into the faces. She was looking for him, her boyfriend. It was hard to imagine him. She never saw him. only felt his body. She named her son Robert. She came to live on the island alone with her child. It was difficult for her to feed the child at the same time and provide for her financially. In such a limbo, she could not take care of the child. Robert was restless, constantly crying. There was no help. One day, having gathered her son, Mary went to the nearest grocery store. Leaving her son on the street, she tried to leave in a hurry, but the loud cry of her child stopped her. God, what am I doing? She went back to her son. With the child, she wandered the dark streets all night. There was a real war inside her head. She understood that the child was from her lover, which was the fruit of their true love. It was tough for her to live on. She ran out of money. One day, she decided to take her own life. She stepped up the highway with trembling hands and tears in her eyes, suffocating with tears. The sparkle of the headlights blinded her. One car braked sharply in front of her. The driver got out of the vehicle and began shouting at her. She stood, petrified, her son bursting with tears. The man grabbed her and the child and put them in the car and drove them home. He was shocked to see the state of their home and poverty they were living in. He understood what the girl was running from. He understood why she wanted to kill herself and her child. I'm so tired of living. These problems are constantly weighing on my shoulders. She talked and cried at the same time. Sam, the name of her savior, promised to help her. It was painful for him to watch as a young mother struggled to survive in this vast world. The difficulty was that she had never met her lover. In her memories, there was only a voice and image that she imagined for herself. Maybe there was no such person. The man understood the longer he stayed with her, the more he liked her. Mary was ready to take the courtship of a new guy. But one day, she saw her picture in Sam's folder. It was her very first picture. It was me. She froze. Under a pile of papers, she found a guy who was accused of stealing. After learning about the boy's prison, she hurried to see him. She wanted the truth. She did not expect to see her lover as she walked along a dark, damp-soaked corridor. An iron door opened, and she entered the meeting room. She had to wait a few minutes and felt like her whole life was flashing before her eyes. The door opened, but she hesitated to turn. A man's trembling voice called out to her, "Mary!" Hearing his voice, she fell unconscious. She came to her senses and said, "It's that voice. It's him. I found you." After talking to JC, she returned home. Sam sat there as if nothing was happening. Then she realized that Sam was deliberately hiding all the information. He decided to take JC's place, but Mary continued to be calm. Her lover had 6 months to wait before he went to prison. Then they could start over and raise the boy. Sam tried his best to extend JC's sentence, and his goal was to get rid of JC forever, but fate told him otherwise. Mary miraculously learned of Sam's treacherous plan. He tried to deceptively marry the girl, to take away the hut that was in the lighthouse. 3 months had passed. JC was out of prison. During that time, Mary lived in a hut near the lighthouse. Another sleepless night passed. One morning, her son woke up and ran to pick up the seashells after the storm. "Mom," said the child's voice. The woman shuddered. Sam stood on the shore and looked at them with a smile. Mary screamed and ran to kiss her lover. Within a week, they found the right words and explained to Robert that they now had a fully fledged family. "Was your dad?" She said nothing with tears in her eyes. But there was one unfinished business. It was Sam. Mary told about the schemes of the cunning man. JC decided to seek help from the relevant authorities. When he arrived there, he met a friend with whom he went on the same excursion where he saw Mary and lost his mind a few years ago. His friend listened to his story. He promised to help. Soon Sam's frauds were exposed, and the man was imprisoned. The happy family decided to sell all the property and leave the island. With the money they received, they bought a house where they raised their children in perfect harmony.